Have you submitted your original artwork to QPL's Banned Books Library Card Design Contest? The winning art will be featured on QPL's Banned Books Special Edition Library Card, and the winning artist will also receive a $2,000 cash prize. Visit queenslib.org/design contest to learn more and enter the contest by November 30th. Join us during Native American Heritage Month as we honor Indigenous voices and stories and explore the rich history, culture, and contributions of Native American communities. Enjoy our programs and check out our curated book lists for adults, teens, and kids. Learn more at queenslibrary.org. Let's get ready for Thanksgiving. Join us at the library for holiday festivities and crafts throughout the month of November. Visit the QPL calendar on our website to learn about all of our Thanksgiving programs.
Greetings, everybody, now and in the future, watching this video. I am Eli Moss, and joining me tonight is
Rebecca Legier.
And we are so excited to be here in this event with the Queens Public Library. I started doing these live at the Queens Public Library in 2018. So this is my 7th year being invited back to host these events, and it is my absolute honor. I love libraries. I think I can say for both of us, we love libraries. They're such an important thing in our world and in our lives. I wanted to first just thank Janati for the invitation, and also thank Eve, who's an incredible tech person working for the library, and they are wonderful. Thank you for all library workers. As we all know, you are essential workers in our lives and communities, and we don't know what we would do without you. Thank you to the audience, known and unknown. This is a program that happens in relationship to something known as Indie Author Day. This celebration is in its 9th year. There's events at libraries and organizations across the US and Canada. And this is also NaPoWriMo, which is like National Poetry Writing Month. And so there's people all over the place who are using this month to write poetry. A couple of access notes. This program will be archived, and YouTube will automatically create closed captions and transcripts for those of you who need that. We're going to quickly give a land acknowledgement, give you a couple of introductions to who exactly we are and what are we doing here, and then we will get into the conversation. Something else to know for you watching at home, even though this is webinar style and we cannot see you, you are welcome to give comments and questions as the chat goes. You can put them in the live stream and we will respond to them when we're able, but we will open at the end for a Q&A. Meanwhile, the Queens Public Library system is located on, and myself, Eli, and Rebecca are also based in Lenape-Hokiig, the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape, Canarsie, Matakanak, Rockaway, and Maspeth peoples. We ask you to join us in acknowledging these communities, their elders, both past and present, as well as in future generations. An important thing to be doing this week as we recognize the mourning going on with our Indigenous communities. All right, who are we? I'm going to ask Rebecca to start because I have heard enough of my own voice for now.
Hello, everybody. It's really a joy to be here to be celebrating community and collaboration. My name is Rebecca Legier, and I am a white presenting woman. I have gray salt and pepper hair with mostly salt at this point. I have blue eyes, and I am wearing black framed glasses and a blue scarf around my neck with a purplish, probably looks black sweater today. If you saw me in life, I'm 5'7", so I'm pretty tall, but not as tall as my dreams. So I keep dreaming taller.
Do you want to give yourself a little bio intro too?
Oh, my bio. Well, I'm originally from Nova Scotia, and it's still the land and the sea are very much there. The ocean is really where I consider myself from. And I am choreographer from a young vision, but have been weaving my way in dance through choreography, directing, and teaching. I'm a faculty member at Princeton University, but I really prioritize the research that comes across disciplines and with people in studios and in conversations and in archives. So.
Like this one. Thank you so much. So I'm Eli Moss. I am a white-bodied person. I'm also, if I was standing up, 5'7", so we have that in common. Tonight I am wearing a black onesie, which also you cannot see, under a brown jacket. I have on a sort of faded blue hat under which my hair is also graying, and I have on wooden framed glasses. In the surrounds behind me, there is a large, tall bookshelf, a white wall with a protest sign, and a drum in the background. And I too am an interdisciplinary researcher working across a variety of creative practices and disciplines, including performance, text, sound, installation, social practice, and a variety of other forms. I often will say that my practice and my medium is, in fact, questions. I too am a faculty member. I've been teaching both in public spaces and in higher education for about 20 years. I right now am a faculty member at Pratt Institute, where I am also an interfaith advisor. I'm also a community minister at Judson Memorial Church in New York City, and a seminarian getting ordained for interspiritual practice. I like to think of myself as an information worker and a systems doula, as our systems both birth and sort of transform. We won't say die, we'll just say evolve. All right, so what are we going to be talking about tonight? As you maybe saw in the description of this event, we're talking about sort of community and publishing and creative practice, and why these things are so important right now in times of crisis. What not only folks who think of themselves as doing those things, but everyone really stands to gain from these things being active in our worlds and in our communities. So, I think our first questions kind of are the general ones. Who is dance and other performance for? Who are books for? Why do we translate across these fields? We might not be using the word translation in terms of language, right? But how do we translate our lives into these forms? And why is that important? I think of these things as sort of like a human technology. Is art just a thing that humans have always done? And then why is it important to document this? What happens when something goes onto the stage or onto the page or in a gallery or on the street? And then we make the choice to make media around it, make a book around it, right? Why is this important? Why is this useful? Why is it liberatory, maybe? So I'm going to let Rebecca respond a little bit to that. And we're also going to introduce the idea of sort of a framework that I use around that, which we call archive and access. So you might hear us talking about that a little bit tonight, but that has to do with the idea of like, what does it mean to kind of like get things in the record? Whose record? Who's keeping the story? And what does it mean to make those things accessible now and in the future? Rebecca.
Eli, so many rich questions. I'm going to dive in and I'm going to jump around. So that's how I swim.
As we do.
I was thinking this morning in preparing about this conversation is about the role of performance as this mode of publishing, right? Like it's a mode of sharing. And then even more subtly than that, when my child brings home an artwork from school, that's a mode of publishing. That's a sharing. And that also becomes an archive that has a solidity of an emotional state, a capturing in time, a perspective in time, a kind of knowing to it. And it becomes a capsule in a sense. And similar to performance making, when I think back at works past or works I've seen, the recent Bill T. Jones restaging of Still Here at BAM is a great case of this, seeing something in relationship to my memory of it. And so no one now would have had incredible work that was made without a restaging. And yet, is that actually always necessary if we have access to the materials behind and the questions that went into the making? And so I think one of the things that we really found in our collaboration about There Might Be Others was this intersection of how can performance have another life? so that it's not simply sort of the thing, the end of the meal. It's also the ingredients of the meal. It's also the questions that were asked to make the decisions. It's also what was discarded in that meal, because I feel like that is what gives rise to future possibility and future conversations. That it's one thing to look at something and say, oh, that was fabulous, but it's another thing to have access to the questions that went into it. So in a way, scientists do this more. They always publish their methodologies, right? So like, how is it that by publishing our methodologies, it's not giving away something, it's inviting in. And I think in publishing the book, when we had the opening, There Might Be Others, we said, go make it. We said, that's it. That's it. So it is yours. This can be yours. And so to me, it's that fundamental access and archive weaving.
And it's amazing to be having this conversation through the medium of the library, right? And I think I said to you the other day, and some of the work that I've done with librarians in the last couple of years, a librarian up at the Free Library in Vermont, near where I was working at Bennington, said to me, the library is a portal, not a box. And I love that. Right. And I love the idea that the book is a portal, not a container. So, or the performance is a portal, not a container. It's an invitation, not an exhibition. But even an exhibition can be an invitation. Right. And when we're thinking about what the intention is and how you present that work or the archive of the work to the public, right? And what we're sort of saying the relationship is it closure in order to put ourselves on a higher pedestal and be like, this is ours and something that we do well, and let's show you how well we do it, and it's not available to you, right? And so I think for us, and sort of in the archive and access model, and when I was doing this work through the operating system, which was really an experiment in open sourcing this kind of human technology, that's how it was done, right? Everything was Creative Commons, and in the language of the operating system, the reason that it was iterated that way and used that language was because I was coming from my own lineage, working in open sourced futurist communities where we were having these conversations about technology and about sort of building online spaces and utilizing sort of agile mechanisms of like community and organizational structure in order to change the way that things worked, right? And so I love this idea about, and it's funny because we'll talk a little bit about There Might Be Others, scientists were involved, right? And in many of Rebecca's projects, scientists are involved. And for me, even in my writing and my practice and my teaching, I'll often be like, here's a way to use the scientific method for your creative writing, right? Here's a way to use these sort of ideas of hypothesis, iteration, question as opposed to finality of answer, right? And I think that that's very important for both Rebecca and I, and that's kind of why even in our ways of describing ourselves, we're like, we do research, right? Like, this is all R&D. Like, we're not here being like, I'm great at this. We're actually like, hey, performance is a really helpful medium through which to ask this question about what it is that we're doing together, right? And I think some of the archive and access part of this says, who is able to look at the stage and say, oh, that's what's happening? Right. And so that question of who is the translator and how we sort of like popularize or make accessible or make sort of fungible for just everyone on the street, right? The poetry like bread is for everyone, quote that some folks know from Rock Dalton feels like this for me, right? Yep. Art is a thing that humans do. Dance is a thing that humans do. And so when we say we made this dance, we're not saying it's a thing that we did. We're saying it's a thing that you can do, right? And how might you learn your body through this thing? So let's talk a little bit about There Might Be Others, and also maybe even about like the way we started working together, because we identified in preparing for this that it was now over 10 years ago. And you can kind of talk a little bit about The Invisible Dog and what we were originally doing with the Reconversations, maybe.
Yeah, and I love the idea of a literacy of seeing, and then how is dance inhabiting in those conversations of other literacies that are grown and known in culture. And there's that embodiment sense that we all have a body, we all move our body, stand up, we sit down, that is a dance. And yet when it comes to certain forms of dance, there feels like sometimes it's a move, it's only for X bodies or Y bodies. And so what are those questions that are coming arise too? Yeah, I think we met through Coming Together Attica, which is the piece I created, The Invisible Dog, in 2013, in collaboration with the astounding performers, as well as working with the Frederick Chevsky score that was written after the Attica prison riots to really look at the roles of confinement and the social implications of what still is considered one of the largest state-sponsored massacres in the American prison. And the idea of having conversations about the process, because that's actually one of the first pieces of music that was a process music as well. And it was a set of criteria set up that musicians had to improvise along, like only play the G's in this bar or in this section, and then the rules would change. And we were doing a similar compositional thing in the dance of matching the kinds of improvisatorial arcs with different constraints and restraints and shifts and changes overall. And we started having conversations about the intersection between those forms and how, instead of illustrating the music, I was attempting to go in and recreate the structure of it from a movement perspective. And yeah.
Yeah. And so at that time, I had initiated and for some time had been running what we called reconversations, which had, all sorts of grammatical and sort of a parenthetical structure in it, right? So it's like recon, and it was like boxed in, and then it said conversation, right? But the idea was how, especially with ephemeral forms, can the space of the conversation and archival conversation that sort of allows the process that often goes into these things to breathe, and documents the sort of before, during, and after, how can that both facilitate breath within the work itself as it's happening, but also how can that become an incredible resource for the makers themselves, other makers, and then other people who might be interested in being in conversation about the topic that the thing is about. So in this case, the Attica riots, or like how we make dance about about a contemporary social issue. And so Rebecca and I began through that process doing conversations, and that was like an online series, but I had also already begun publishing specifically like books around performance and moving that into something that would then take, physical book form, and what would that look like? And so when There Might Be Others, which was a enormously long process, right, which you can talk about as well, and that had gone through all these international iterations, and development with all these different companies, we then were like, this is a perfect thing to make a sort of almost like reconversation oriented, same sort of idea book out of, right? And we're going to show you a couple of pages from that book, but I'll invite Rebecca to say a little bit just about kind of like what There Might Be Others wanted to do. And then what our sort of proposal even for ourselves was in terms of like why to make this into a book, and like what we wanted to model by making that into a book. And I think one of the other things that I would say is that something that I always thought to do, and that I think was important to us, is like there is a space that's left out in terms of often institutions that present works like not having the means or tools to create this kind of documentation, right? You might see like an artist book or an exhibition book like done at the Met or the MoMA, right? For something really big with a lot of funding. But often these smaller shows, small show, but something that has 10 years of process behind it. The incredible organizations that are so often giving us space to put these on just simply do not have the bandwidth to make this kind of documentation. And often even the sort of more ephemeral documentation that they used to make is now what's known as born digital, right? And we know very little about, this is kind of a new world where a lot of our material, which would become archival, is born digital, right? And so as we move into an uncertain future, whose job is it to make sure there's documentation, right? The thing that we maybe know is going to be around might actually still be the physical form if you put it in some sort of archive, right? So how are we telling our own histories, and how are we ensuring a sort of like parity of documentation and archival like legibility and historicity of the more independent stuff, because things that are going into more official, more well-paid, more sort of like status quo archives are not only getting the digital, they are also getting the physical. So what role can we as artists doing independent things play in making sure that things make it to the archive, right? Because the archive has a longer arm, and we often go back and be like, oh, what was actually happening in the 70s is not what we said was happening while the 70s was happening. We go back and tell that story through a archival process of retelling once we have more of those parts, right? So how do we ensure that that loop gets shorter, because we now have more capacity to do that ourselves as it's happening, right? So that's part of it as well. But anyway, I'll stop talking.
Amazing. I just
there might be others. We could really, just spiral off in 15 different places. I'm still thinking about the literacy of seeing. I'm just like gagged. I'm writing it down.
Well, I want to take it really small for a moment to the inspiration of There Might Be Others, because I think it speaks to this way in which structures cross forms. So I was digging into minimalism, like how far can you take it? Can I do this one gesture? How far could I take that and it still retain a whisper, a quality, a known entity of it? It is still related in some in my head. And there's so many ways choreographers transpose those kinds of things. So that was something. And I've always been a choreographer who has changed my process for every piece, because I feel like that's the thing I have to interrogate. If I'm not changing my process, then I'm kind of making the same piece over and over again, right? Okay. So I had learned that apparently Dr. Seuss was challenged by his publisher to write Thinking Green Eggs and Ham, to write a book with 50 words or less, right?
Ooh.
So I was like, that is a great challenge. What is this? And so Terry Riley's score for a piece called In C was essentially 53 modules of music, and the performers had instructions. Perform each module as many times as you want. Some were 3 notes, some were melodies. Before moving on to the next, proceed in order and stay within 3.
Right.
So these are such beautiful rules. Like here's a task for you to do. You have some agency of how much you can do it. You can't just run along. You have to go in order. So you have some confidence in what to do next. And you have to listen to the group and stay within. So it's an exercise in agency and community. And so I took this on and made, I think, 10 movement modules.
That's an incredible experimental musician, by the way, over there in the chat. Casey Clark, yeah.
Oh my God. Hello. I made 10 movement modules, and I applied those instructions, and my dancers, they took this on, and they did a 20-minute improvisation with those same rules, and it was terrible. I mean, I just started laughing and laughing and laughing because of how bad it was, because I could see, what I was laughing is I could see my limitations. I could see what I did over and over. See those things that I got hung up on. And so then it got exciting, because then I could, we need a module like this. We need a module like this. We need a module like this. Well, fast forward 3 more years, researching with performers in Poland, performers in Turkey, including folk dancers, performers in Canada, performers in the US, we found out that actually the performers had to choose the order of performance. That was the key, suggested by one of the performers, Corey Kresge. Forever indebted to that suggestion. And then the conversation got really interesting, because then each module had to have its own house of how far could you go with that? That could be a whole dance right there. Each module needed its own container. So each module needed its own container. And then how could you choose what to do next? What if 5 performers all chose the same thing at once? So the task of listening and attending to each other became even more important. And we developed this system of governing laws to help them, because we would do run-throughs, and I had to change how I was giving feedback. I could no longer say, oh, that was really good, because then they would try to repeat it. I would have to say, hey, when there was a module where there was bright, punchy movement in this kind of thing, and then there was a counterpoint to something really still over here, that's a pattern to seek out. So when you're looking around the room and you're going to make an offering, how can you seek out compositional ideas? And so all the performers had to shift how they thought from executing ideas to composing in real time.
And then, of course, I'm going to read a little quote here. We brought in other people from other fields because we realized that the choices that we were making, right? And this is, I can't really take responsibility for this, but the choices that are being made are influenced by all sorts of things in our conditioning as human beings, right? So Rebecca can tell you a little bit about when Naomi Eric Leonard came in, because this was There Might Be Others science advisor,
Yes.
right? So she writes in the insights that we put in process notes in the book, There Might Be Others offers a roomy setting for the meeting of art and science. At its heart are questions surrounding the role of sociality in collective art making, questions that intrigue artists and scientists. In its structure is a ready path for exploring, artistically and scientifically, how the rules, the artists, and the context affect the social dynamics, the ever-shifting compositional authority, and the collective outcomes. So Leonard was a flock theory person and helped the people in this experiment, musicians as well as dancers, think about their own instincts, right? So how can this sort of creative process not only, like ask us these questions, but how then can we work transdisciplinarily with people across disciplines to help us even in our creative practice think about the things that may be implicit, that are conditioned? And then again, how can the folks who are documenting then say, oh, well, no one would ever realize that we talked to this amazing scientist, right? Like, where does that go? And
in fact, she ran rehearsals for a week. And in fact, we turned over our whole rehearsal process to her, and she restructured the ways based on her research with the motion of honeybees and her all types of research she does in collective motion. And it completely changed. We had a preconceived idea based on our dance experiences of how groups can interact and introduce whole new vocabularies and ways of thinking.
And so part of the, and I often think about, and I feel like I've said this to you before, Rebecca, one of the groups that was involved in There Might Be Others is So Percussion, who's amazing percussion ensemble. And I ended up doing another book with them following this, actually, for a show we did at BAM, which was a gun show, which again was sort of a performance piece related to a social issue, right? So gun violence. And as we worked with a ton of data, but we knew we were making a book from the beginning, that was also sort of like, how does that change the process of developing a show to know that there's going to be documentation? So it's sort of like, we have all this data. How much of it do we need to front load in the piece? Do we need to put all this data on stage? Are there going to be slides of all the gun violence thing? I mean, does it have to be in the playbill? Where is it going to go? We have mountains of data, right? We have all this stuff. So it's sort of like, whether from Leonard in this piece, whether from the data we did in that piece, like, where does the book and the knowledge, again, of that long arm of the archive, the long arm of the document, free us up to sort of like allow our creative process to respond to, but not necessarily have to be weighted down with all of the actual like concreteness of that part of the process, right? So shall we show a little bit of the book?
Book and then a little video?
And then a little video. So what we're going to do is we're going to show.
Oh, I think Eli has disappeared. I can show some of the book. So here we go. This is There Might Be Others, the book. Whoop, I'm going to slide it over here. And one of the things I wanted to do was share with you some of the governing rules. So Eve, will you share the video now? And then I can share some of the movies over. So this video was taken at New York Live Arts in March 2016. And it is a trailer, as you will, of excerpts from a performance, a single performance, and every night was completely different because every night the performers were choosing what happened next in real time. And on stage, you'll see 15 performers from 4 countries, Poland, Turkey, Canada, and the US. And you'll see 12 musicians, members of the music ensemble So Percussion, the music ensemble Mobius Percussion, and 4 independent percussionists. And the score was composed by Dan Truman, a phenomenal composer.
Incredible.
And he composed 40 modules of music, and we had 40 modules of dance. And the composer, the music community, and the dance communities were choosing their orders independently in performance. However, there were 5 modules that if anyone did, a dancer did, or a musician did, there was a rule that everyone had to gather in that module before moving on. So every single person in these 26 people on stage had the chance, had the opportunity, the ability to change the course of the show. So here are some of the governing rules that you're seeing enacted. You can stop someone at any time. They can choose to stop or keep going. When confusion happens, collect to survive. And remember, structure will emerge from connection. If there is chaos, hierarchy will emerge. Work to come together. Keep saying yes. Act generously when frustrated. Let go of taste and preferences and join. Notice personal resistance and redirect to seeing others and joining. Scan the room. If someone is alone, go to where they are.
It gives me great joy to see the piece. I love the piece so much. And, this was back in 2016 in New York Live Arts, which Rebecca probably said, but it was so incredible to be there for this. And even just like now that we've spent so many years with this book, that's the reason that we made the book. Because how many nights of performance did we have?
4,
right? But there's years, and this is so often the case. Years and years and years and years of process. We have these incredible videos. We had incredible photography done in preparation for making the book. But this is now a media archive. But we have an invitation to anyone to not only like watch it, but do this yourselves, right? I'm a little concerned. I don't know what happened when I disappeared, but it might be that the PDF crashed the thing. So maybe we won't show the book. Maybe we'll just show it like in book form. So this is the book itself, in fact. And as Rebecca was saying, I think and I still think that this was really a perfect piece to make a book of, because, because of the sort of, I want to go back to the idea of like art and dance and performance as a human technology. I think this is really, really important right now, because I think it's really exciting to sort of reclaim these things as belonging to everybody, right? And so a book like There Might Be Others, which says, yeah, look, we made this piece, but like make it in your living room, like make it with your friends. Like it's not for dancers, it's just for bodies, right? Use whatever you have on hand. You don't need to have actual drums. You can just clap or whatever, right? So here's the music, and so we gave you, right? So when you go into this book, which again, I will just show you really quickly. There's beautiful, beautiful, like dance photography in this book. It's just like extremely, extremely beautiful. You can bring Rebecca back. But each sort of pair of pages is going to be sort of, instructions for the dance and instructions for the music side to side. And as you can see on this page, sometimes there's a little bit of a staff with a score on it, but often it's just an instruction, right? So human pile, dance. Minimum 3 bodies lay on top of each other. There can be multiple piles, and you can switch between piles. You can rearrange people in your group. And it explains how to start the module, and then how to differentiate it from different modules. But then the same for the musicians, which is on the right-hand side. Wheel the instrument into the dance space. Gather around the concert bass drum. Collectively play it on both sides with your hands, creating a continuous quiet roll, but one that is constantly changing in subtle ways and occasionally explosive, right? So in this book, we've got in the front sort of a little bit of how to use this book, notes from the choreographer, notes from Dan, the composer, and then we've got performing instructions, what it means to open this up, how to use this book, begin seeing, right? Begin seeing. So how to use this score, what does it mean to enter this space? And so it truly was an invitation. And, as we're coming back together to think about this kind of next project that we're going to introduce, I think for me, when we're framing this conversation today, not only in terms of like our own careers and the work that we do professionally, but why is this an important conversation for us to be having now? I really do think that that openness of invitation that reinforces this work as not elitist, right? As in fact, truly, and we both work for private institutions that have their problems with gatekeeping, right? But how can we as people in these fields, as practitioners, push back against that and say that's not what we're here for? We need to have jobs, so we have them, but but we also are really committed to making this available. And what does that look like? So we're going to tell you a little bit. Well, Rebecca first is going to tell you a little bit about Noli Te Mere, which is a really exciting new project that she's working on. And we'll tell you a little bit about, where we're thinking about going with this next, and also how kind of the process of having thought this way about dance and documentation has continued to influence what Rebecca does.
Yeah. Thank you. Oh my goodness. I get so excited about that piece. So I thought I would never make a group piece again after There Might Be Others.
And yet.
And yet in 2018, I was at a conference on the intersections of arts and engineering that was run by Naomi Leonard, the science advisor for There Might Be Others, which is part of a fabulous faculty group called Creative X that's artists and engineers and really thinking at those places where is the maximal places of overlap and how can we get entangled and be undisciplined profoundly together. So I met a visual artist named Janet Eckelman who creates large public size scale net sculptures. And she had a history of growing up and living for almost 10 years in Bali, collaborating with indigenous net makers for fishing industry, and started to build these complex systems through twine that have now become on 5 continents. You can look up janeteckelman.org, www.eckelman.com. And she and I came together, and just humans have always sort of imagined themselves in her sculptures. And we thought, okay, we have to put humans in the sculptures. And so I'm going to share a little from then to now, where we are. So Eve, will you go ahead and share the slideshow? Thank you. Yay. Okay, there we are. So this was one of our very first experiments. This was a net that was donated. We were working in Seattle at the University of Washington in the architecture department as a graduate student exploration, a studio course to design nets for performance. And we're all low on the ground, but it was a big aha moment because, as you can see, the body creates a visibility of connection. We can see how the pulling of one performer affects another. And what we were most struck by is how one person's plucking of one mesh, one piece of twine, whoosh, can change the whole system. And so we were so drawn in by the poetics of this that we decided we had to keep going, and we had to keep finding ways to bring humans into these environments. And so this was an example of another workshop in Montreal in January 2023. We had some more rehearsal nets. We started to really learn how to weave them together in different modes to create different complexities, to whether the net was going to be more relaxed and shakeable and movable, or more stiff, and examine those stiffness properties, and to really find out what is that intersection of human connection across this changing landscape. Because the truth is like anytime you made one change, the whole situational responsibility you have to others is radically different. If someone rolled one way, you might get thrown off the net, right? So you have to be so attuned to each other, so in line, so in collaboration. And this was Janet, those first rehearsal nets were just practice nets. And now we've come into a preliminary design. We're changing the colors on this, but they're 2 giant sets of pillows now. And this is 2 of the performers just learning to stand, right? Just learning to stand and laugh and be together in an environment that changes constantly. And we started making this in 2019. And of course, we're shut down in the pandemics. And this idea of how do we navigate instability is such a pertinent and ongoing and clear question that we're all asking. And some people can hang upside down. And some people can hang by their feet. But again, sort of bringing to the embodiment of how is it that we can navigate these unstable worlds. And these people have experience in aerial forms as well as dance, and they're bringing that expertise into this room. So then this summer we had an incredible residency at the Center for Contemporary Performance, and we started to be able to really think more on scale, really think about community, really start to imagine every corner is now on a pulley system, so the entire sculpture can change in performance. And really, what is this relationship between the human and our environment? How are we impacted by the environment, and how can we change the environment? And so in performance, it's all the choreographic is changing the sculpture is changing the human. And so we then start to be able to experiment with some lighting, and lighting really becomes this incredible tool to create and enhance a world. We started to find out what it is to light the performers within this environment. Who do they become? What is this landscape they're in? What is it to be able to hang off safely with each other in community? And then here are some of our more recent looks at experimenting with that shape, with that change of form, how that net can transform in place and time. And the title, at first we had a title called Everywhere the Edges, which was taken from the Beaufort scale, which is the scale that measures wind on the water. And Beaufort, the one where it's violent, I think it's the number 9, where waves appearing and everywhere the edges of the crests are appearing. And that's what it really felt like in those early examples. But at one point, Janet turned to me and she said, "No, I really think this is about noli timere, which means be not afraid." And that really is the ethos they have to have when they're running through this environment. They don't know if it's going to behave the same way each time. And that's really the ethos I have to have as a maker, because this is a whole new practice. Talk about changing my process.
And we've talked about, how there's a beauty. You can even hear, as Rebecca's talking, the poetics of this embodied representation and translation of what we're all dealing with as interdependent humans in different nets and webs of meaning and of power and of relationship and of resources, etc. This is an incredible embodiment of that. And sometimes art representation allows us to move into a space that opens discussion and makes it visual and visible in a way that gets us kind of out of the stuckness of talking about what's happening on the ground. Like, there are things in this dance, there are things in this project that allow us to have a shared vocabulary and a collective reference point about these sort of metaphorical implications of what it means to be reliant on others in these nets.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a project about interdependence, and the sort of the real patterns of ripple that a small movement can make. It's something about the power of the individual within these nets. Mm-hmm. And there's also something really lovely and I think beautiful in choosing to call it Be Not Afraid, right? Because what it ultimately is about our capacity to learn how to pay attention in those ways that are necessary. And so as we're talking about what can dance do, what can performance do, what can the arts do, what can creativity do, and then what can documenting this and making that available to other people do? Yes, we are seeking shared vocabulary. We are seeking ways to talk about the things that we're struggling to do, right? And so when we not only sort of like introduce terminology or say like, let's use these terms from science, but it becomes legible and lived and embodied in a way that is immediately tangible to the audience, right? And so how many people are going to be able to actually go and see this? I wish everybody, but we know not accessible, not geographically possible, right? So when we make documentation, we then blow up infinitely, even as we're doing tonight with this conversation, the capacity for learning and expansion, the sort of like infinite nets of meaning and meaning making that happen from this seed of what we made, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Eve. And I think, it is our goal, and it's almost, this piece will premiere at the McCarter Theater in Princeton, New Jersey, February 7th and 8th, with a relaxed performance February 8th in the afternoon. But the goal actually is to be outside and to be able to bridge towards a public that isn't have to come into a theater,
Yeah.
that can be accessible in a park, in a public space. I mean, Janet's ethos is public art, and that in this moment, there's not a lot of investment going into public art. And how do we make that? And yet, isn't this the time that it could bring us together the most? It could
And-
be that.
And
Yeah.
so how does the conversation and the documentation process, which even as funding for these large things gets diminished, the technologies that we currently have for the creation of documentation, even if a project couldn't be made, if the process of making the project was there, you could make documentation of that process and it could still be very powerful for many people, right? And those tools are now more widely available than they've ever been. And the defunding and underfunding of projects actually has very little power over our capacity, at least at this moment, to make documentation and to spread conversations and media. We have more access to that than we have ever had as makers and as artists and just simply as human beings, right? You may be like, oh, influencers, but like the fact that influencers are like someone who lives next door to you that like didn't get a degree and whatever and is just talking, like that's actually fantastic, right? Like that disruption is powerful and tangible, right? And so how can our sort of like our capacity for collective meaning making through the act of documentation remain a liberatory act, right? Of the things we're able to get made and of the things we're not able to get made. And we just skip that step, right? Because it's sometimes also some of the reason that I did the publishing project I did for so long and taught these methodologies was sort of like, sometimes it's important and you don't have 3 years, 10 years, whatever, to be like, is someone going to publish this for me? I went through 8 cycles of rejection. It's about contemporary life. I need it to get out now. Who cares? Right? I mean, I always think about, books. It's so interesting. Like, can you imagine like a painter sending a painting out and then being like, we love it, but we're going to make all these changes to your painting. The paper, excuse me, like, can you imagine? Editing is so hilarious, right? And so sometimes it's really valuable, but sometimes it's also just like, I made a thing,
right?
I want people to see it, and it's not perfect, and that's okay, right? Because the thing is actually about the making of the thing and the conversation around the thing, not about the perfection, right? And so, how can we approach sort of archive and access in this way? And what are we going to do with this book, Rebecca? And I see that it's 7:48. So we're kind of, you can, as Eve said before, and as we said before, and thank you, Eve, for all your help, you can, drop questions in the chat. We'll keep talking. We are going to try to close right at 8 out of respect for folks watching at home and for the wonderful staff at the library. But we're going to talk a little bit about what we might try to do with Noli Te Mire in terms of sort of documentation and tools and open sourcing it up. What is that maybe going to look like?
Well, one of the things that after our last talk, I'm really compelled to continue bringing forward is the embodied experience of the people in the net and what that is, and how can we allow that to have a voice and allow that to have a contribution. As I was explaining to you, we've been prototyping workshops where we pair participant from any background, any age, onto the net with a cast member to experience what it is just to roll across the surface and then to walk across the surface and to fall on the surface. And just through those simple actions, the feedback was such a profound coming into oneself to be with community. And anytime we're having a lived, embodied experience of the manifestation of something in the world, I feel like that kind of resonance is so needed and necessary. It's not just an Instagram photo. It's a instant experience.
And it's also the idea of sort of exploded authorship, right? And sort of like the humility of being like, yes, I made the container for this, but I'm not controlling its meaning. It actually is like ontologically extremely vast, and like everyone is making these different things. So like, and there's no way to show you the entirety of this very substantial book, but in the end of There Might Be Others, there are pages and pages of notes on process that kind of look like this, right? And it says, feedback from there might be other collaborators. And it says, we provided dancers, musicians, and other collaborators with the following instructions and set of questions. And we gave them a set of questions. Who are you? What is your disciplinary title? What were you curious about leading to production? Could this piece be described as a metaphor, right? Like, how has your understanding of this piece changed? And then we have, a dancer from Canada and a lighting designer from Poland and, like a performer from a different country and a drummer, and right. And so you've got all these different people who were part of the process at different points, giving you your voice, right? So it isn't that sort of hierarchical authorship of being like, the dancer or the choreographer has the ultimate statement on what this piece is. No, I mean, there is an explosion of an understanding and a welcoming of being like, we're not trying to actually control this. It's a vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other part is the iterative process. You brought this up earlier, but I wanted to sort of hen in there again, because Janet and I have cycled through so many net formations, and that ways in which, how many times are you and we in a collaboration where someone is to deliver a thing that then is to be used, versus like, we tried a few things out, then we shared it back, and then they came up with this idea, and then we shared it back. So the iterative process has gone back and forth into live, like, interaction, into design constraints, into back and forth. And so definitely have arrived at a system for rigging that's unique. We've arrived at a kind of way of sculpture that's unlike her other sculptures. I mean, this is not just her sculptures. This is a new entity that can do things that the others cannot, and cannot do those things that
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of, it's interesting because there are parallels in this to sort of like thinking about access notes or the kinds of materials and media that we make from disability justice angle around kind of like how someone can engage with a performance, right? But like sort of the exploding of the idea of the access note or access documentation. It's sort of like, and Rebecca and I were talking about this, is sort of like, when you're inviting people into a performance, like what are the different kinds of access documentation that can change the way that someone engages with that performance before, during, and after? I think and I think about this in gallery spaces, museum spaces too. Like, and I do this with my students, like, what is the role of like wall text? What does it mean to be like, are you over rendering it or somehow destroying the thing by sort of like over explaining? But the notion that something is accessible or can be legible to different bodies, different cultural contexts is in a way also a sort of elitism, right? It's sort of like the notion that that your idea of it, or that, that there's legibility, draws up a lot of questions about legible to who. And sure, you can be like, well, if they get it, they get it. But it's sort of like, they may even, if you give access notes, not understand exactly where you're coming at, right? Yeah. But if there is a sort of social and cultural desire to have something become a tool to sort of like diminish the role of the contextual or processual in the presentation of the thing, and just say, well, if they get it, they get it, is also gatekeeping, right? Yeah, it's gatekeeping to not explain.
Right. It's such a beautiful, delicate balance of the offer to give freedom of interpretation, the offer to make that the practice, and yet what everyone needs to be able to feel comfortable offering that is different.
Yeah, of course.
And how they enter into the room and their histories, it's going to completely shift how something is seen, and then finding those stories too. I mean, that other part of understanding what an audience perceives is actually a stunning sort of version of the reciprocity of performance.
Well, and it's so interesting. I think we think about this in terms of like websites, but the idea of UX, right? Which is kind of like, how do you design interfaces? How do you design things in terms of the experience of the user? This is about user experience, but like, what about user experience for the arts? What about like UX for the arts, right? It's sort of like, when I come into a space, is the way that I navigate my brain, my body, my cultural history, my biases, is this space thinking about me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Who is it thinking about? Who is it acknowledging? Who is it welcoming into the room, right? And sure, like, So when we as media makers or, folks around like culture makers or sort of information workers, when we make not only the piece, but the work around the piece that understands that long arm of the archive and who might be using it, we're kind of doing this like interdisciplinary UX.
Yeah.
Who is it for and what is it for? Those are the questions that I ask in every project. And that's this again, right? Who is it for and what is it for? And the next thing is like, and once you answer those two questions, what more might be necessary to open it for other who's and whats, right? And not constrain unintentionally. We're at 7:55. No one asked us questions. Eve said no questions. That's okay. You're all just stunned by all of these ideas, and you're going to be emailing us and texting us, which is totally fine. What do you think, Rebecca? Any final thoughts?
So I feel like I have a stream of thoughts bubbling because this comes you. I'm always so inspired to keep going, and I have to bubble them down a little bit. Yeah, and I continue to be grateful to you and the questions you bring in bringing me out of that narrowness that can happen in singular art making too, right? Like we do silo ourselves and then we pull back out and we do, and dance itself is a community practice. I am in rooms with other people all the time. I'm not choosing to make solo work. There's a lot of solo work that happens in planning, but I am in rooms with others, and those invitations and offerings are a constant back and forth as well. And so being in conversation to you feels like very much part of that same ebb and flow. And I'm so grateful for your questioning, and hearing you speak about the ideas continues to allow them to grow and unfold in new ways.
Thank you so much. I mean, and I feel the same. And I mean, I think that what I hope that we're modeling here as well, like as people who work in education and who think about ourselves as sort of public practitioners, right? What does it mean to understand yourself as a public practitioner, as a creative practitioner, right? And say, yes, I'm in these private spaces, I'm in these closed rooms, but not by choice necessarily. Some of that is just kind of, as we're moving through the systems that currently exist and maybe trying to build different kinds of systems, and also acknowledging these sort of like super structures of just human nature and the ways that these practices that now have maybe become siloed or become institutionalized and named, and there's capital letters on them and there's departments around them. And, I've always laughed about sort of like, if you're a New Yorker, like, maybe you thought about going to LaGuardia, or it was once called Music and Art, and they made you choose. They were like, you have to be an artist or a musician or a dancer, and you can't. And I was like, I was a polymath then, I'm a polymath now. I was like, I don't want to choose. I still don't want to choose. But the sort of idea that you have to choose, right? And that that someone over there is an artist, and like that's a thing with a capital A that like belongs to this person who like is in the art world in some way, and that art is recognizable and it takes a form. And like if you're successful, it means you're selling or you're in galleries, or you know what I mean? And that like art is not like a thing that we're doing as humans to help us understand the world, to help us understand each other, and that it's constantly available, right? So how can we be public practitioners? Open that room, invite you to make your own room, your own room. I think, and it feels really exciting and really important to sort of push back on those silos.
Yeah.
Because we can get so caught in them simply out of a sense of survival, out of a desire to keep our work going and sustain ourselves and have food on the table and paying our bills and be housed, especially in this climate, right? And so how can we both give ourselves grace for the things that often requires of us just to be alive and survive in this climate where there's so few social services, right? But so how can we then model and say, yeah, this is imperfect. I'm in that system over there. I'd feel kind of uncomfortable with the whole thing, but I'm also I have the power and agency to bring this conversation out to the public and make something that is available to everyone and make it Creative Commons, right? Which we did with this book as well. You can go, and Eve can put it in the chat. There's a link to the open access library at the operating system, which everything we ever published is there as a PDF. You can make a donation, but like the idea was for you to have it, right? And this is one of those things where we can model moving ourselves away from the idea of scarcity.
Right.
It can't be everyone has to pay for this or you're somehow cheating me. Do you believe in libraries? That was always the question I would ask people. I was like, so you don't want to distribute the PDF, but you're okay with someone getting it at the library? And then I would ask questions. I was like, what if someone doesn't have access to a library that has the money to buy this kind of thing? Libraries are under so much pressure. Why do you feel comfortable with someone being able to go down the block and like get it from the library, but you don't want there to be an open PDF? Like, why? What, the problem is that we don't have enough money for food and shelter, and there isn't like accessible housing, and there isn't free healthcare like in the United States. Not that someone can get your book for free. That's like, we're confusing apples and oranges. You want housing, but also it's okay if someone wants to take this and sell it.
Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
mean, okay, I hope you make money. Like, I don't know, we didn't, but like, that wasn't the point, right? The point is that it's actually powerful to say, like, you know what? I just want you to have this.
Yeah.
I want it to exist, and you can make copies of it and teach it in your class. Maybe let us know. We'd love that. We are excited, but like, just use it. It's for you. Yeah. Dance is for you. Art is for you. Books are for you. Make them, right? All right. It's 8:01. It's time to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you
you
for
so
being
much.
here.
Stay tuned for more on Noli Tamiri and more from the library always. And we'll see you out there in the world. Take care of each other. Don't be afraid.